What's up, guys? Today we are going to be doing an install of our D60 Coil Over Kit and our heavy duty steering kit on this F250 with D60 in it. First thing we're going to do is strip all of the old suspension and steering linkage out of the truck, disconnect the brake lines, disconnect the leaf springs, the track bar, steering linkage, get the axle rolled out from underneath of it, and remove the factory brackets on the frame. We're going to leave the castle nut on there, hammer on the end. There we go. Never even touched the top, and you can see why I left the nut on there. Yeah, these brake lines go away, and we use some extended brake lines. They're stainless steel, DOT approved. One thing to consider when doing this on the lift, we just lost about 1,000 pounds of counterweight front to back, so always be really careful when you pick it back up that it doesn't just fall off the lift. Hasn't happened to me yet, and I hope it never does, but something to be aware of. Done with the axle for now. I mean, we gotta cut all the brackets off and weld ours on and paint it and whatnot, but we're not going to do that under the truck. So another note, the sway bar is not going to be used anymore because this is a radius arm setup. So the radius arms in turn end up using like the axle essentially to limit sway. This won't be needed. I've towed lots of big heavy trailers over mountain passes with no front sway bar and our coilover kit, and no concerns. This is not always this easy, by the way. We have had to cut these, because this bracket goes away anyhow. We've had to cut the bracket off because the bolt has been rusted and frozen into the leaf spring bushing sleeve. So this is a great example of how it can go smoothly. Not a great example of what half of the trucks out there, or more depending on your area, will be like. Now we're going to pull out the shocks, factory shock towers, sway bar links, and then from that point it's gonna get real loud and we're gonna start air hammering off all the factory rivets because it's really the only way to get them out. So we'll take this bracket off. Be careful, for some reason this has happened plenty of times. You get in the zone taking out these rivets and you may end up taking out one of the body mount rivets, and you don't want to do that. So we're going to pull this bracket off, this bump stop, and the sway bar bracket on both sides.
All right, guys, we're getting ready to cut the old bracketry off that accommodated the leaf spring. So we've got the perch on this side, as well as where the U-bolts would go through and your sway bar hooks up. And then on this side, same thing, bracket on the back, where the sway bar used to mount up. We'll just cut these guys off nice and smooth. Try not to cut it in the axle tube. You don't have to get it perfectly flush. If you want to just cut it off a little conservatively and then come back with a flap disc, that's what we like to do. Then you'll get it nice and smooth and make plenty of room for our new brackets to get welded on. All right, you guys, we got the brackets cut off. You can see we still got a bit left to clean off, but that's the way we wanted it. We wanted to make sure we weren't cutting into the axle tube itself. So we'll take the cutoff wheel, get these big chunks out of the way, and then we'll switch to a flap disc and just smooth it all out. Going up the face of this knuckle, I'm actually gonna clean it a little bit more than I did, but you'll see that's where the tabs for the shock mount itself are. So you're gonna be welding all the way up that and back down the insides. So just make sure this stuff is a little more rough than the axle tube. It takes a little bit more pressure to clean it off, but you want a nice clean surface like we got here all the way up there, just to make sure that weld penetrates perfectly. The next step, we have to pull the carrier out of here and get the axle seals out, because we're gonna have to preheat this whole thing to 450 degrees, and that essentially just destroys those seals. So before we can pull those seals, we're gonna have to start by pulling the hubs in order to get the axles out of the way. So that's the next step. I'm gonna pull calipers and then hubs, rotors, and axles out. That way we can pull that center carrier out. All right, guys, on the other side, we were able to just kind of beat on the snout with a rubber mallet and work it loose. This guy is being a little bit tougher. We've got it to move a little bit, but it's just seized at this point. So we're gonna show you our trick in the shop, which is taking the nuts that we already took out to get the hub off. We'll thread both of these back on. Make sure the one with the little nipple tab is pointing in so you don't squash it. But we'll thread both of these up tight against each other with full grip on the threads. And then we'll use our puller here and just push on the axle shaft itself and pull the snout right off. Take the caps off both the carrier bearings, and then we'll start working on getting the carrier itself out. And on these guys, you want to just keep track of either side and the orientation of both. So we'll set them over there to the side, exactly facing the same direction, that way we don't forget. Since we're not replacing the bearings or the races themselves this time, we want to just put it back exactly how it was before. I think the best way that we found around here is to get a pry bar under one of the teeth here and then use the mechanical advantage and actually use another pry bar on the yoke and twist and use that to kind of pry on this upper one and pull the bearings and races out of their seats. And I'm sure it's possible to do it with one person, but it's not really worth the risk. I'd go get a helper. It's only gonna take you 5 minutes, and an extra set of hands can make a world of difference. You don't wanna drop this on your toes. right, guys, we got the carrier out of our way. So next step is going to be knocking the 2 axle seals out. Our strategy for that is to get a couple long extensions, long enough to reach for the longer length of the tube, and we'll just run them in there until we can feel that the seal, and just hammer until we can get them out.
Okay, we are at the point of putting the axle brackets on the axle. We've gotten this all cleaned up. Grant did a great job. And now it's time to get these welded on, which is definitely the most crucial part of the whole installation, just getting this correct. But it's not that difficult. The first thing I want to note is caster. So if you notice the C here, you want, while you're driving, more caster, which will rock the C back. And if you center this piece in the C, then it rocks back and it puts the joint for the shock at a bit of an angle. So what we try to do is overcompensate for that a little bit and have it favor the front side of the C so that your lower shock mount is not in an awkward position. We start with passenger side bracket first because it is by far the easiest to put on, and we'll get it tacked into place. Then we'll use our angle finder, get that one set in the same position as this, making sure that they're both the same so that your wheelbase isn't different from side to side. So it's better to take a little extra time getting all this stuff lined up and situated properly. A couple other things to note is like our jack stands, for instance, the handles are both on the same side so that there's no weirdness in how they are sitting. The concrete floor, we're not doing it over a crack, you know, where one half is on this side of the crack and the other half's on the other. You try to eliminate as many of those variables as possible. So we'll go ahead and get this one set up and get it tacked in place. One thing to consider when you're tacking these on is, like I said earlier, this is the easiest side to adjust. So when you get it tacked in place and then you go over to do this side, if you aren't able to get it in the same position, you may need to cut your tacks off and adjust this side a little bit. So just something to consider when you do tack this in place. Tack it where you're able to get in there with a cutoff wheel and break those tacks if need be. Also, the metal that these knuckles are made out of, or the C's are made out of, is technically cast steel instead of cast iron and doesn't need to be preheated to weld, unlike the differential housing, which is cast iron and does need to be preheated. Plan on doing a little bit of either grinding to the bracket or to the axle to get it to fit correctly. And this one needs just a little bit. Yeah, 0.1 is pretty negligible. 0.1. So this is a great reference because this piece could be welded, you know, slightly different than this side, just minorly, but this edge is a CNC laser cut edge that is flat, and it's the same on both of these. And it ties into the lower link mount. So setting both of these at the same angle makes it to where these lower link mount positions and the upper link mount positions are symmetrical from side to side, which, in this scenario, all that matters is the relationship of these two to each other and the axle. Okay, this part is probably the most crucial part. Well, maybe I said that before, but we are currently preheating the diff housing in order to be able to weld it, because it's cast iron, and if we were to just weld it cold, it would essentially crack immediately and be really, really weak. So the way that we are able to weld cast iron is by heating it up to around 450 degrees, welding it at 450 degrees, and then super important, we're gonna wrap it in a welding blanket to try and keep all that heat in the axle and in the housing, so that the cool down process is as slow as possible. So when we go to weld this, Grant is going to weld, and wherever he's not welding, I'm gonna continue heating with the torch so that we keep like a consistent heat throughout. But this is pretty basic. We're just using a laser thermometer and an oxyacetylene torch and a MIG welder. It can be TIG welded as well. The worst part about it, it takes a while because it's gonna heat soak this whole thing, so the heat dissipates fast. But the worst part is when you're welding, it's just really hot for a few minutes, you know? We've been keeping the torch on the diff housing the entire time Grant was welding it, just to keep the heat in there. And now I'm doing a final little, heat up so that we can wrap it with the welding blanket and get it to cool down as slowly as possible. So there we go. We got to weld the bracket on over the other side. We got to put the track bar bracket on.
All right, you guys, I just got the passenger side bracket all welded in. Everything is finished, including the gussets. You get two little gussets, one for either side. The driver's side has this angle cut into it so it can mate up against the differential housing. This side's the flat side. Pretty much impossible to get them mixed up. You can see it's right in there. Now that we've got this guy all burnt in, we will switch gears and get the track bar mount set up next. It's might require a little bit of clearancing in here just to smooth it out and get a nice flush finish. But the way we set this guy up is we'll take a tape measure and measure off the flat machine surface on the C on the back of that. We'll go 3 5/8 from there. You can see we've got a mark already made, and that'll be the outside edge of this guy, right about there. And it ends up lining up the bolt for the track bar, just about ends up center with the outside edge of the axle bracket itself. We'll zero out our angle finder on the lip of this tab right here, and then we'll match that with the front edge of the track bar mount. Almost there, almost there. All right, you guys, we let the axle sit overnight, wrapped up in the blanket, so it's all cooled down. We also went ahead and cleaned the entire thing, painted everything. Just while we were at it, might as well get the whole thing painted, make it look good. So next step is installing the new axle seals. All right, you guys, we got the first one in there. I just wanted to remind you to make sure your surfaces are nice and flush, that it's even on both sides. And then just to show you on this side, we took some Scotch-Brite and cleaned up. There's a little bit of corrosion in there. So we're just gonna do our best to make sure this is as clean as possible before we get started. We took our air gun, blew a bunch of dust out of here, and we'll take some brake clean and just make sure it's as spotless as we can get it. This can only go on one way. It's not a perfect, like a symmetrical pattern, but you can tell because it'll have the groove on the top. Okay guys, we're going to throw the hub back on there. I was just going to remind you that the first nut you put on, that you tighten, make sure that little tab that sticks up is pointing out. Quite a few of them that are. Okay, we'll find that little tab that sticks out from the inner locking nut and try to eyeball where it's going to land, which hole we can get it to line up on our lock washer here. You can see that all the holes are slightly offset, so it might be easier to put it on that way. Okay, you guys, we've got the, we've got the rivets out from the rear leaf spring hanger. That's gonna help us locate our radius arm brackets. You can see those two line up. There's another one underneath the frame right there. We're gonna have to open them up with a 1/2-inch drill bit. So I'm gonna do that real quick, and then we'll get the radius arm bracket mocked up and we can locate these rear two and the other bottom one. Quickly wanted to mention, you guys, on the driver's side frame rail, we've got fuel lines and brake lines and your wiring harness. Everything runs down this side of the frame. And so I'm just gonna throw a piece of scrap metal up in between all those lines and the back of the frame. That way, once we drill through, we don't puncture anything. All right, you guys, we've got the bracket mounted to the frame. You wanna make sure you use that bottom one too, and that it's snug up against the bottom of the frame as well. I'm gonna take a scribe and just mark out these holes. There's these two on the outside of the frame, and then one more underneath. All right, you guys, right there's the two marks we made on the outside of the frame. We've got another one underneath, so we know right where to go. I'm just gonna take a punch some holes right in the center to help us when we get started drilling. That way, it doesn't wander at all. The 4 up top, and then the 2 underneath. Now that we've got the radius arm bracket mounted, we'll go to the shock tower. Now that we've got the shock tower up there loosely, I haven't tightened any of the bolts all the way. On the driver's side, we've got the track bar bracket that also mounts and utilizes the 3 holes underneath. And then you'll see on Powerstroke trucks, you'll have 2 bolts here already. If it's a gas truck 460, you won't. The kit will send 2 bolts for this purpose. You'll see these 2 holes line up right there. So first things first, we've got to loosen those guys up. For these bottom 3 bolts that go through not only the track bar bracket, but the shock tower too, you'll have 3 of these M12 bolts that are just a little bit longer. This is the standard length that are used in all the other locations, but just because it has to pass through both of those guys, these guys are 40. All right, you guys, we're gonna be installing our thurn joints into the end of our radius arms. These will come pre-installed when you order the kit, but if you go to have everything powder coated, you'll probably have to uninstall them. So we figured just show you our process. So I'll start with greasing the inside of this and then greasing this guy a little bit too. You can get where the pivot ball is gonna seat. Pop that down a little bit. On the washers, you can see just from the manufacturing process, there's a sharper edge and a smoother edge. So we'll put the smoother edge towards the rubber bushing just so it doesn't wear on it any extra. Go. Get a little more grease on the pivot itself. Just lube up the pivot a little bit too. It's all seated in there. So in order to get the last snap ring on this side in, we're going to use this install tool that we get from Thurn. I'm sure you could come up with some kind of homebrew setup. So let's take our radius arms and get the grease zerks threaded into either side real quick. On our track bar, we've got another grease zerk on the bushing side of things. Throw that guy in. On the other end, we've got our Heim joint. We just threw some anti-seize in there, threaded it in about half the way. It'll probably take some adjustment once you get it on the truck, but halfway puts you at a good point. Last but not least, we've got our upper links. You'll see one end is left-hand thread, the other side is right-hand thread. So we'll just thread in the correct Johnny joint accordingly. We've got our jam nuts threaded in on there already. We just maxed them out to keep them out of the way. And then similar to the track bar, we'll thread these guys in about halfway and leave ourselves room for adjustment once we get it on the truck. So we've got the axle positioned back under the truck. All of our frame side brackets are bolted on and tight and torqued to spec. First thing we're gonna do is hang radius arms. As you guys can see, there's a bunch of different options for where to locate your radius arm. It all depends on wheel size or wheel and tire size combo, and also how much lift you're using. For our setup today, we're going to be using the bottom and front hole. All right, we've got it mounted into the frame side bracket, so we'll pull it up to the axle, and this can take a little shimmying back and forth. You can see we're off by just a little bit, so I'll bump it around. Come here a little bit. There we go. Our upper link will go next. We'll position the zerk facing down on the axle side of things, and then this other guy facing up on the radius arm. When you go to get this upper link in, it's easy for it to get bound in there. So best thing to do is get a jack stand under the end of your pumpkin here and jack it up, adjust it not only this way, but if you keep it square with the truck, it'll help a lot too, as far as left to right and keeping that Johnny joint from binding inside the bracket.
Now is the time to put the track bar in, and so what we're gonna do to get it close to the correct length is we're gonna position the axle at roughly what ride height this is gonna be, which is about 26 inches from the top of the wheel arch to the center of the hub. And then we're going to position the axle side to side under the frame using a framing square, which is not the most technical tool, but without an alignment rack, this is the easiest way to get it close so that when you do take it to the alignment shop, hopefully they don't have to make as many adjustments. And then we'll bolt it in and get it set and move on to the next part. About there. Wow, 8 3/4. So we got 8 3/4, 7 1/2 gives us 1 1/4. So we need to move it over about 5/8 of an inch. So we should be somewhere in from just this measurement around the 8 to 8 1/4 mark to the center of the upper ball joint. Which that appears just about right. So now we are roughly centered under the frame, and now it's time to put the track bar in. Frame side first. Get that positioned. And then, because the only adjustment on this track bar is at the heim joint here, we set it up there, and then we'll make our final adjustment down here. Now it's time to install the shocks. So we're going to lift the truck back up and keep the axle in place to give us enough room. We'll start with the top and then put it in the bottom and do that on both sides. And then we can set it back down on its own weight, and after we figure out how it's sitting, once the shocks and springs are installed, is when we will make our adjustments on the preload of the coil spring to get our ride height where we want it. Our shock mounting points are set up for running 5/8 hardware, which is not always the standard that shocks come with. So if you are going to supply your own shocks like JP did, then make sure that you get the hardware for the shock itself for 5/8 bolts. So we're doing the shocks now, and the easiest way to get them in is to put the passenger side shock in first, because of the way it works when the vehicle lifts. It's kind of hard to explain, but we'll do passenger side and then we'll do driver side. Yep, keep going. Take our washer. We are going to install the reservoir mounting brackets, which go onto the top of the shock tower. There's 2 little holes. Use this M8 hardware, and then clamp your reservoir to the mount plate. You don't want to clamp it too tight though, because there's a floating piston in here that if you without having the clamps on the very ends, If you put too much pressure in the middle, then it can restrict the movement of that piston. So just one thing to be careful of. Now it's time to assemble the steering linkage. So this here is a stock set of steering linkage, Moog parts, and this stuff here is our heavy duty steering linkage that is designed to work with our coilover suspension kit as well, as far as drag length goes, and it's significantly stronger and beefier than the stock stuff. The tie rod ends are way stronger, but it is a custom steering, and it is very, very, very important that you follow the install instructions to a T to make sure that especially the tie rod ends at the knuckles fully seat and they don't back the castle nuts off. If you've installed steering linkage before, then you're the one that really needs to read the install instructions, because there's a couple added steps that are very important for your safety and everybody else on the road safety. So we're gonna toss this. So first off, when you open everything up, make note that there are 2 different part number tie rod ends. You have 3 tie rod ends that are 4136s, and they go to the knuckles and the pitman arm, and then you have 1 tie rod end that's a 4133, and it goes from the drag link to the tie rod itself. There's minor physical appearance differences that would take, you know, some micrometers to really know. So don't just open all of them and not have an idea on which one is which. And we have our adjuster sleeves and our low misalignment dust boots. Now, these low misalignment dust boots are one of the big things that helps this steering linkage feel tighter and your whole steering system feel tighter when you're driving, because it prevents the tie rod from rolling one way or the other when you go to turn the wheels. That creates like a decent amount of slop in the steering wheel, and this fixes it. But with these is where the extra caution comes in, because they go in between the tie rod end and the knuckle. They replace the normal dust boots. And if your knuckles have had steering linkage over torqued on them, or wallowed out the holes or something, then the tie rod end, the tapered stud of the tie rod end, will need to go further into the knuckle than factory brand new. And that means you got to trim these down so that they'll allow the tie rod end to go all the way up in. But we'll get to that in a few. So start with some anti-seize, which I hate using, but it's so important. And our brush broke, so junk screwdriver it is. This just makes it to where when you have to replace tie rod ends at some point down the road, after many, many, many thousands of miles of road debris, you're actually able to get this stuff loose. So we're going to start, there's 3 adjuster sleeves. These are what are called double adjusters. So we're going to thread them all the way in. They're threaded on the outside and on the inside, opposite threads. And I'm not like tightening it to the point where, you know, it's impacting, it's just faster to use that. This end does not have an adjuster because we really, honestly, this actually only needs one adjuster, but there's not really another option for tube adapters, so it's got two adjusters that can work. This end, we set the depth of the tie rod end, you know, threaded in to the what's called the Y-link adapter, and then we leave it, and all of our toe adjustment is done on the other side here. So we'll get that in set first, and we will use the 4136 tie rod end. I'm gonna set this 4133 out of the way. You wouldn't believe how many people open everything up and then read the instructions and realize that there's one different tie rod end. So just be aware of that. Once again, put the anti-seize on these threads, and these are left-handed thread, so you'll lefty-tighty, righty-loosey. Doesn't make sense, but. And on this, you'll see there's a slot right here. What we're going to do is thread the tie rod end in until the threads go just past the end of the slot, and then we're going to leave it. Pointing it straight up and down. Thread our jam nut down. We'll take our pinch bolt, because what keeps this really in place is not the jam nut as much as it is the pinch bolt that squeezes everything together. So took another 4136 tie rod end, putting more anti-seize on, and this will get threaded all the way in to the adjuster sleeve till the threads are buried. Then when you go to adjust it, you keep the tie rod itself and the tie rod end from moving, and you only turn this adjuster sleeve. That way the tie rod end comes out of the adjuster sleeve at an equal amount that the adjuster sleeve comes out of the tube adapter. Both of these are bottomed out, and we will not be making our adjustment here until it's on the truck, and it's going to be pretty towed in. But having this bolted, you know, to the knuckles makes it to where this tube doesn't rotate, and neither does this, just the adjuster does. Now we're going to put our low misalignment dust boots on. To do that, there is a small little like spring ring thing in here that you peel off and pop that off, toss it in the trash. Now we're going to take these low misalignment dust boots, we're going to pop the rubber part out of the metal cap, use a screwdriver to kind of work my way around. If we need to trim these, which I would say 50% of the trucks need it, and I think that number is going up as they get older. We're going to trim the top side of this, and all of this is covered on the install instructions, and the bottom side of this. That way these two shrink together. push this on and push that on. Do that on the other side as well. Now we are going to put the tie rod ends in the drag link, and we're going to make note of which tie rod end is the oddball that goes right here so that we don't mix that up, and then we're ready to start assembling it on the truck. This one I'm going to leave this goofy like plastic cover for the tie rod end on so that I know that it's the one that goes here. Okay, so we are ready to put the tie rod end in. There's 6 washers that this comes with, and you will use 2 washers underneath the castle nut on both of the tie rod ends going to the knuckles and the tie rod end going to the pitman arm. And all the washers do is space out the castle nut so that the hole for the cotter pin lines up right where it needs to be. Now we're going to loosen these. And see how we started loosening it and it already dropped down? That means this side at least needs that dust boot trimmed because the tapered stud did not fully seat in the knuckle. Yep, this side did the same. So we're going to trim these. So far, so good on this side. You know, if you do hit it hard enough, you might be able to get it to come out, but it should not come out with like pretty decent hits with a dead blow, and you are not going to hurt this tie rod by doing that. So now they're fully seated. We know that they're not going to back the castle nuts off. So we'll torque them down for the 3rd time, and then we'll put our cotter pins in and then put our drag link in. So you guys will remember that we kept this little plastic cover on the one tie rod end that's different and goes in here. So now we will take that off and then this into our pitman arm. The last 2. No washers underneath the castle nut of the different tie rod end that goes between the drag link and the tie rod. And on these, I like to keep the the pinch bolt sections pointed up to match the front. Whatever you do, never use an impact gun on steering linkage, at least for installing. We got all the steering linkage on and tested and torqued to spec, so we're good to go there. Remember in the instructions it says to double check that everything is torqued after 50 to 100 miles. So obviously we haven't done that yet, but we will. And we still need to put our Zerk fittings in, which we'll get like a pump or 2 of grease as well, just to make sure they're full. And all of the pinch bolts are left loose for now because right now it is probably majorly towed in, and the drag link is probably gonna make the steering wheel about, you know, an entire turn off. So we'll tighten those up once we get wheels and tires on and adjust it and do an extra fancy tape measure alignment, just so that when we drive it to the alignment shop, it's not, you know, a complete bear to drive and doesn't prematurely wear tires. And then the alignment shop can get it all dialed in. We're just gonna use a reference point on the tire over here and use the same reference point on the other side. This is not, you know, going to get it as close as an alignment machine can with lasers and all of that, but this will get us close enough to drive it there and not have as weird of, you know, handling and steering conditions. So we'll get these, we'll measure here to the other side, and we'll measure up here and adjust our toe based off of that. And we want our toe, especially after it goes to the alignment shop, to be 0. No toe in, just 0 toe. Wheels straight ahead. That way it doesn't, with a straight axle, you don't want toe in, especially with this setup, because it can do weird things with how it reacts to caster and stuff like that. So we're gonna get this measured up and go from there. Lined up straight with the truck, so it looks like we gotta turn them a little bit that way, and then we'll adjust our drag link. So the only thing to note on this is because you can adjust both sides, you want to, you know, make a few adjustments on the pitman arm side, a few adjustments on the tie rod side, just so that you don't have one tie rod end like all the way in the tube and the other one way far out. This is the adjustment that you really don't need an alignment machine for, because all you're doing is getting your steering wheel straight. The toe is the most important one. Since we got our toe adjustment, you know, where we want it, just with the tape measure, we're gonna go ahead and torque down the pinch bolts on the tie rod. We still have a few adjustments to make, coilover wise, ride height wise. So we're not going to tighten down the pinch bolts on the drag link yet. We will before we take it out and test drive, but that's probably going to have to get adjusted some more here in the next few minutes. So we'll start with getting these tightened down. Right now we're going to adjust our coilovers. So I'm measuring from the top of the upper spring retainer, which is also the adjuster, to the top of the threads on this side, which comes out to right around 2 3/8. This side we are right around 2 3/8. So what I want to do now is see if we can get it leveled out side to side with caster adjustments, and then we'll adjust the coilovers to bring it up about another inch. Caster wise, we shoot for a bare minimum of 3.5 degrees, but preferably 4.5 degrees to 6 degrees of caster. You know, the more caster will make the steering a little bit slower, but it'll track a whole lot better going down the road. So we give it a little extra. And you'll need to tell your alignment shop the specifics that you want 0 toe and you want I would shoot for 4.5+ degrees of caster, because if they go just off of the factory spec for these trucks, they will, they'll give it a little toe in and it will have minimal caster. So right now, the way we adjust caster is by turning this upper link, and you should not need a big, tool to grab onto it. If it's too hard to turn, then it means you're fighting the other side. And sometimes this can be a little tricky to get it all set up properly, and it takes a couple attempts. But right now what we're trying to do is even out the caster so we don't have cross caster issues and binding. And it will also, if you just adjust one side and you don't get it just right, it will cause the truck to sit uneven, not level. In order to get a reference here, we'll go on the frame, I believe, on the flat spot, zero that out. Should be pretty close. And then we'll go on the flat spot where the ball joint is, and get a rough idea of where our caster's at. We're at 3.6. We'll compare sides. So we're adjusting the ride height here by measuring from the top of the wheel arch down to the center of the hub. And you want to be somewhere in the bare minimum is like 25 to 25.5. We usually set them for customer rigs somewhere around 26, 26.5. To adjust our coilovers, we're going to lift the truck back up so that it's easier to adjust the upper spring seat on those. And then we're gonna tighten it by about 1/2 inch. So we don't have the technical spanner tool for adjusting these, but a nice 5/16 punch or drill bit works great. It fits right in the hole, nice and tight. You want it to be a tight fit, otherwise this soft aluminum, when you pry on it, will deform. So we're gonna be extra careful and give it a little more preload. Now that we've got the coilover adjusted where we think we want it, I'm gonna go ahead and tighten these back down, or tighten down these Allens that kind of pinch it all together. And then we're gonna turn, not every coilover has this, but these do. This like second locking ring, we'll adjust that down and tighten it onto the top of this spring seat. 26.25, 26 3/8-ish. About the same over here. So we're pretty well leveled out and adjusted, and you'll need to tell your alignment shop the specifics that you want zero toe, and you want, I would shoot for 4.5+ degrees of caster, because if they go just off of the factory spec for these trucks, they will, they'll give it a little toe in and it will have minimal caster. Now we're gonna install the bump stops. So these are Super Springs bump stops that are kind of progressive as far as how stiff they are. And depending on where you set the ride height of your setup, if you're on the lower end, then you'll wanna trim off one bulge, one layer, whatever, of the bump stop to give you just a little more up travel. And by doing that, you won't have an issue with, bottoming out. It'll just give it a little bit more room, and you still won't have metal on metal contact. But these are, like I said, Super Springs bump stops. We supply this plate that they bolt to, and then this is the mount that goes on the shock tower. So it gets bolted up through the center, and then these get bolted onto here, and they're slotted so that you can adjust it as far as how you want it to line up with the top of the axle. Using our M8 hardware here, we will put this up through. Before putting the bump stop in, it is best to put the bolt through for the limit straps so that there's enough room to get it in. The factory hole that we provided here, and then it attaches down at the upper link. So one thing to note is the upper link where it mounts to the axle will not get a washer on the nut side because the nut's going to go flat up against the limit strap. And if by not running a washer, you make sure that you get full thread contact through the locking portion of the nut. Now that we have our caster and upper links set close to where we want them, we're going to tighten the jam nuts, and we want to do both of them at the same time because it's probably going to roll the joint end over. So if we roll both joint ends over, then once we get it tight, we can stick a pry bar in there and get the joint straightened out again. Touching. Okay. Now we just gotta bleed the brakes and bleed the power steering. And we're ready for a test drive after we double check that all of our hardware is tightened down and torqued to spec. Our next step is going to be installing the extended brake lines that came with it. That comes with the kit. These are DOT approved, stainless steel with a nice kind of coating on them, and they come with all new banjo bolts and copper washers. So pretty slick. They even go, like, they fit into the factory brackets like they should. So. Hope you guys enjoyed this install video. I know it's long and detailed, but it's what people have been asking for. Don't forget to bleed your brakes, check all your fluids, check and make sure you torqued all the bolts and you're all good to go. And then it's time to go out and have some fun.